Hello, everybody. Lizzie here with some tips on how to increase our students' vocabulary knowledge by reusing and recycling vocabulary that comes up in class. So typically we are told to reduce, reuse, recycle our plastics, our materials, and quite rightly. But in class, the idea is not to reduce, but to increase our students' vocabulary by reusing and recycling it as often in as many different ways as possible. So we'll start off with some assumptions that I've made about vocabulary acquisition, the process of learning, retaining, and being able to use vocabulary. We'll start with the most basic, and I would think everybody would agree that vocabulary is important. Um, Mistakes with vocabulary are likely to cause many, many more misunderstandings than grammar mistakes. If we use the wrong tense, or if we use the wrong determiner, or something like that, it's unlikely to affect how the message is received. Whereas if we use a completely wrong word, it's likely the person will have no idea what we mean. Also, a very large proportion of the production that native speakers produce in terms of language is made up of the 3,000 most common words. Can you guess the proportion? It's actually 80%. And it's much higher in spoken production. So in writing, the most common 3,000 words in English make up 80% of what native speakers write. There are obviously not just learning those 3,000 words, but also the way that they combine. Hundreds and thousands of combinations. So there is a lot for our learners to learn, not just the 3,000 words themselves, although that's a really useful starting point, but we also need to teach them how those words combine. Which brings me on to this point, which is that learning vocabulary, teaching vocabulary is not just about teaching those words in isolation. Students may know what the word get means, or they may think they know, but when we combine it with all the other things that it could go with, get drunk, get going, get a place to live, get up, get over. There's so many different ways to use words that change their meanings completely. So we're talking about collocations, fixed expressions, semi-fixed expressions, and knowing these prefabricated chunks, remembering words in their common combinations, means that we can be more fluent. Instead of taking the time to retrieve words and slot them into a grammatical framework, learners have the chunk ready to go, and it means that it frees up the mental space to be able to think and to make their communication more automatic. And this will help students become more fluent and help them with their English skills. But it's not just about how much you know, it's also how well you know it. Knowing a word is not just about knowing what it means. That's obviously a really important part of knowing a word. But you need to know how it's spelt, you need to know how to pronounce it, you need to know how it works in a sentence, what verb forms typically come after it, before it, what words go with it, what are typical collocations, how formal is it, what circumstances would this be an appropriate word or phrase to use, what associations does the word have, how's it going to affect the communication, and also how frequent it is. Here are some more assumptions about vocabulary learning. So what we teach is not necessarily what students learn. We might go into a class planning a lesson on the present perfect, or a reading comprehension, or some other form of writing lesson or whatever. And what the students come out with is 5 new words that they didn't know before, or some collocations or phrases that they didn't know before. This is certainly very true in my experience. Students might pick up words which they need for their jobs, for their studies, that are personal to them, or they might just pick up words that they like the sound of, that maybe resonate with them, or that mean something in their language or in their personality. Incidental learning is a big one. So it's not just about what the teacher teaches, but the surrounding language and how things might be picked up without the teacher having it as part of their lesson aim. Another assumption about the way that vocabulary is learned is that just being exposed to vocabulary doesn't always lead to intake, that is, the ability for students to recognise and to use that language. So, actually, despite the bad rap that rote learning and memorisation has rightly or wrongly got itself over the years, over the decades of language teaching, it is actually proven to speed up the process of acquiring language. So conscious learning has its place. So as a teacher, where do I get lexis from? If the students, if it's not just about the language that I'm going into the lesson planning to teach, where else does language spring from? Yes, it could come through the lexical focus of your lesson. It's planned part of the syllabus. It could be in your course book. Students will also need a good stock of vocabulary in order to use their receptive skills and to develop their receptive skills. So a byproduct of working on reading comprehension or listening comprehension might be, and is very likely to be, a stack of new vocabulary from texts that you choose to use with your students in class, and also from texts that they read as part of their outside class work. We can also find useful vocabulary for learners when they try to produce written or spoken language and get it wrong. And also in preparation for writing and speaking, where students want to say a certain thing in their language and they tell the teacher what that is using whatever words, and then the teacher provides that language. So, sorry, teacher, how do you say, what is the word for a doctor for animals? Or words, or how do you say cutre in English? One of my favourite Spanish words, means slightly dodgy. So there's lots of different sources of vocabulary, and vocabulary that comes up without being part of the plan in a lesson, what do we do with it? So the first thing, quite traditional, but I generally keep a vocabulary column on the board. It's usually on the left-hand side of the board, and it would look something like this. So the words that pop up, or the words that popped up during this lesson, siblings, the former, well, these are some vocabulary items that popped up. And these are my tips for recording vocabulary on the board. Recording it in a full chunk means that students can see how it operates, and they're more likely to acquire those dependent prepositions, those collocations, the type of verb pattern that follows it. I use substitution tables. This is an example of one here. So there's a few actually on my board here. But, let's look at this one. They suspect. So the word is suspect as a verb. I've also highlighted it here as a noun, a suspect. They suspect her of murder, or they suspect her of killing him, and that shows you that it could be followed by a noun or by a verb. And there are two examples, and this is what's called the substitution table. Anything after the line could be substituted as a way of finishing that phrase. I usually write words or the phrases in black or blue because it's more visible for students. I highlight using red and green. Red for pronunciation and green for form, usually. So you can see that here, not just the stress in red, but some sounds as well. And then elements of form like the part of speech, the type of word that comes after it, those would be in green. So once we've got our vocabulary column here, at some point I'm going to need to clean the board, either during the lesson or afterwards, and I don't want to lose this juicy vocabulary. So what I do with this, for each class I have a vocabulary bag, which is a physical manifestation of learning, or in other words, scrap paper, a plastic pocket like this. So you can see there, I have a plastic pocket, there's some blank pieces of paper, and then let's see if I can show you, oops, there we go. So there's some words that I've recorded the vocabulary with the pronunciation and form information, and with some example sentences written down on it as well. That builds up over the course of a week or a few weeks, depending. With rolling enrolments, it's more difficult, but this is one way to encourage new joiners to the class to be able to catch up with vocabulary that they've missed. So I usually use this vocabulary bag or vocab bag in class. You can use the pieces of paper, little review activities, which we'll come to in a moment. But then also use online tools. And this is my favourite one. It's called Quizlet. It doesn't take long to upload the vocabulary that you've learnt during class. Just all it took really was for me to write a definition here with the blank and the part of speech. And then the students click, and on the back is the answer. So in this case, unreliable. They can learn by flicking through, they can practice producing it, they can practice spelling it from the sound, and then they can test themselves as well on, there's various different quiz modes for doing that, and it's quite cool. Cool. So Quizlet they can review in their own time, and that helps them prepare for class and to hopefully more likely to retain that vocabulary. So how can we do review activities? Some people say reviewing in context. That makes sense to me. We learn in context, we use language in context, so why not review it in context? But there are also arguments for reviewing out of context. There's research to back up pretty much any of these methods. Some people recommend reviewing methodically, looking at words in their thematic associations. Or some people say review at random, to practice, to get the brain used to retrieving vocabulary and reinforcing those pathways between words in the brain. Some people suggest reviewing interpersonally with another person. That works well in class. Also intrapersonally, testing yourself, using it in your own language use, just with yourself, can be really powerful as well. Some people suggest reviewing over time, after an hour, after a day, after a week. Again, review with engagement to make it interesting, make it emotional. And these are all tips. So basically, I think from all the literature that's out there, the key is review. It doesn't matter how you do it, but review. Make your brain come across a word several times in several different ways to reinforce retention. The two from this list that we're going to look at in the next few activities are the last two. So reviewing with engagement, making it interesting, using the brain, making associations, and using emotions, personal associations. There's a quote here. So this makes sense to me. If I learn a word and I associate it with a person or an experience, I retain it better. When I've learnt other languages, that's certainly been the case, and there is research to back that up as well. And there's different ways to do that, using your imagination, senses, emotions, using fun, keeping it fun and humorous, and personalising. So let's get cracking. My first activity, not so relevant for me at the moment. I'm recording this in April 2020. We are in the midst of a pandemic and I'm working from home at the moment. But I have enough associations with this because I did it for a good few years here in London. So here are the steps of my daily commute. I walk to the train station, get on the Southern train to London Bridge. I walk over London Bridge. I then get on the Central line at Bank, get off at Tottenham Court Road, and walk the rest of the way to work. So I have very specific experiences of these different steps of my commute. And now I'm going to associate all the words that I've learned over the last few weeks with my teacher with different steps of that commute. So my association for fall out with someone would be, apart from Bank to Tottenham Court Road, if any of you have taken that train at rush hour, you will know it's, if you need that last little space on the carriage and you squeeze on in, you're going to fall out with somebody. Big mouth I would associate with walking from my flat to the station. We have a neighbour who, is quite loud, quite eccentric. So I would associate that with him. And taking the train to London Bridge is sometimes quite a busy affair. So if I'm being literal, that's where I would associate get your foot in the door. I guess it's used more figuratively most of the time. So I would associate that with work, where many years ago I got a job as a teacher and now I'm a teacher trainer and teacher trainer. So I definitely got my foot in the door back then. Okay, so you can see I'm making associations with vocabulary. We would carry on. I would have you write down your stages of your commute as students, read out the vocabulary, and then you make your own associations. Here's another one. This is a very scruffy representation of a floor plan of my apartment. The first step would be to show my partner around my flat virtually. In this day and age with online learning, you could actually show somebody around with a video if you're actually at home. Then obviously, having lived in this flat for quite a while, I have associations with the people and the furniture and the experiences that I have in all of these different places. And then I can hang the vocabulary on to those experiences and places. For example, this is how I did it when my teacher read to me the vocabulary one by one. I'll talk you through a couple of them. So this is my stepson's bedroom. He's 13. And on the floor usually is a pile of dirty washing, which I turn a blind eye most of the time. And then occasionally I just grab it and shove it all in the wash. Over here, witness, this window here looks on to quite a busy railway station in southeast London, and I've witnessed quite a lot of things on that platform. So what's this one here? Cost an arm and a leg. That's a nice expression. This is where my stepson's blueberry addiction costs us an arm and a leg. He quite happily would eat a packet a day, so that's where we put his blueberries. He comes and grabs them and goes back and plays his computer games. Okay, so there are various associations for me, and what you would do with the students is have them draw their flat, talk their partner through it, read out the vocabulary, they make the associations and jot them down, and then talk to their partners about the phrases. Another simple activity is to put some interesting or controversial or slightly strange images around the room. And again, you don't have to have any preconceived ideas. The more personal the association for the student, the more likely they are to remember it. This is a good one for the actual vocabulary slips or the cards. You can give them magnets or blue tack, and they go and actually stick the vocabulary next to the word, the picture that they associate it with. Another one is a little game where they have to use and actually produce the vocabulary. So setting up a scenario, or at a party, I'd like you to use your phrases with your so deal out the vocabulary cards to the students. They have to use the vocabulary in conversation, and then the partner has to guess which phrases they used from the vocabulary bag during the conversation. If you do it competitively, students try to throw each other off the scent by using all of the vocabulary from the vocab bag, so as to trick their partners. So here are some example questions that you might set. I often put these on speech bubbles around the room, and the students walk and look at the conversation topic, chat about it with a partner. And here are some examples. Again, some not so relevant for lockdown. Yeah, so that's the activity, and it works quite well. The students trying to keep their slips secret, and like I said before, throw their partners off the scent. So it's just a variety, a few little activities that I found to be quite fun, engaging, and to help learners retain vocabulary. Here are some references and resources for you of vocabulary. I hope this was useful. I hope you get to use some of these activities, and good luck. Thanks for watching.